Good morning, everyone. And welcome to today's webinar, the CA Your Global Qualification. My name is Poppy Collinson and I'm Director of Business Development at ICAS. Our event this morning will last 1 hour and we're going to be hearing from our guest panelists on how the CA qualification opens doors globally. Global careers aren't just about relocating. Many CAs build international experience by serving international clients, partnering across borders and leading multi-country projects from the UK. Before we begin, I just have a few housekeeping matters to remind you of. You can submit questions at any time through the Q&A facility, which is at the top of your screen. Questions can be submitted anonymously and we'll be saving them all until the end of the webinar for the live Q&A session. Please also join the conversation today through the chat box, also accessed at the top of the screen. This will allow you to comment or discuss with your fellow attendees on matters covered by the webinar. Everyone except the speakers on the webinar are automatically muted, so there's no need at all to be worried about background noise wherever you are. We'll look forward to receiving your questions throughout the course of the webinar, and of course we'll try to get to as many as possible. I'm delighted to be joined today by our panelists, and I'm going to give you a brief introduction before I bring them on screen. Firstly, we have Ken Crawkin, CA. Ken qualified back in 1994, training with a mid-sized national firm before moving to Big Four on qualification. A 1998 secondment took him to New York, and he's stayed in the US ever since. He's now an audit partner at EisnerAmper, a top 20 US public accounting firm where he specializes in the insurance sector. He serves on the ICAS members board and was elected to ICAS Council in 2025. Joining us next is Lisa Thompson, CA. Lisa joined Johnson Carmichael in 2016 as a qualified CA after completing her training in Deloitte's audit practice. As an audit director, she leads audit delivery across a diverse client portfolio with a particular focus on internationally active businesses. And then finally, we're joined by Catherine Ritchie, CA. Catherine began her career with the Big Four, with two of the Big Four, in fact, starting with a KPMG gap year programme and an EY tax internship. She later joined EY's London Operational Transaction Services team, supporting global organisations through the deal lifecycle while completing her CA. After nearly 7 years in professional services, she moved into transformation and strategy at Novartis, working in fast-paced, innovation-led environments. Travel's been a defining thread throughout her career. If I could invite the three panelists to join me on screen now, please.
Hello.
Hi there. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And I'm going to start with what I hope is an easy question and invite you all to tell us what attracted you to a career in accountancy and what your journey to the profession was. And if I could start with you, Ken.
Sure. Thanks, Poppy. Yeah, at high school, talking to the careers advisor, said, you're good at math and English. Why don't you do law or accounting? And, it was pretty basic, but I thought, I actually prefer maths a bit. And I went for accounting. And honestly, it's weird how that's your kind of career path, kind of down that path, but it's worked out pretty well, so I can't complain. So I went to Dundee University. I did a BAc and then joined it's now part of RSM, but it was a pretty small national firm in Glasgow. I think the office was maybe 50 people or so. And I worked on I had a nice experience level of, I did the office's only listed company, but I also worked on paper bag jobs, as I used to call them then, and a bunch of mid-sized kind of audits in the middle. So I had a really nice experience. I got a really nice grounding in in accounting, double entry, dealing with different types and sizes of clients that really prepared me well for, later in my career. So that's my kind of background. Any other questions related to that, or that makes sense? I can't hear you, Poppy. Sorry.
Of course. Sorry for that, I was on mute. So you came through a fairly traditional university accountancy degree from Dundee into a mid-tier firm and then did your training from there.
Yeah.
And did you ever question that, that accounting, because you must have made that decision at quite a young age, you must have been set on that, or did you have thoughts about, was it really the direction you wanted to go in?
I've always been someone that when I kind of started doing something, I found I was very reluctant to kind of to pull back or to change my mind. So I never really had any self-doubt, to be honest. And it was the CA training and all is obviously it's a lot of work, but it provides there's a great framework. And I always just thought this is for me, and maybe I wasn't going to be at that firm the rest of my life, but I thought this is something that I can take and kind of move forward with, and try something else when I move to my next firm or so.
Great, thank you. Catherine, can I ask you about your journey? Was it similar? Did you have a different route in?
Sure, probably a little bit different, but yeah, as there is always crossover when it comes to accountancy and the Big Four. So from my perspective, my journey happened quite unexpectedly. I was at school, we had a lunchtime career session. I happened to be in the library at the time of said career session, and so really kind of stumbled across Deloitte coming in to talk a bit about accountancy as a profession and more so about them as a company. Having not really heard about the Big Four, I went home. I was quite intrigued by it because they were offering a gap year program, and it kind of, having two brothers that have both done gap years, I very much wanted to follow in that path, but definitely wanted some experience as well. So having kind of done my research and applied for those gap year options, I ended up with KPMG, as you mentioned, so working in transactions for 6 months, and definitely gave me my first taste of professional services. I think it definitely confirmed to me I enjoy working with people, solving problems, seeing how business operate, but I was very realistic in the fact that I was 18. It was an exciting environment, whilst my friends were somewhat, struggling to get through their first term at university. And so really when I went to university, I wanted to gain some additional experience through an internship. So I went to Sheffield University, studied economics and geography, so not necessarily linked from an accounting standpoint when it comes to my degree, and went through various applications, very much wanted a in-house financial experience to be able to compare to the Big Four. As it happened, I also applied for the rest of the Big Four to do that comparison, and the EY process was super friendly. The people I met were really interesting, so I ended up doing a tax internship up in Manchester with EY. Typically with kind of the internship as well as the gap year program, you're very much partnered or have a buddy that's quite close in age, and so it was great to discuss with those new graduates about what they were going through. And whilst Ken mentioned it's tough when you're going through the CA qualification, they very much advocated for going to an employee that offered an additional qualification in that regard. So once EY had offered a graduate role, very much happy to accept. I did cheekily ask if I could transfer from Manchester to London, tax to transactions, and also defer again because I wanted to do a bit more travel, but also volunteer at the London 2012 Olympics. So thankfully they said yes to that, and that started kind of my 7-year journey with EY. As you mentioned, working in operational transaction services across the life cycle of a deal, so helping clients typically with a global international footprint buy and sell, kind of what we call diligence, through to actually doing the integrations and the separations. So great experience across a number of different industries. They sponsored me to do my chartered accounting qualification with ICAS, as well as also offered a 3-month secondment. So I got a chance to work in Dubai, which again kind of highlights both from the company perspective, but also the profession aspect, the global mobility that comes with that. In 2019, I think it was, I moved in-house to Novartis. So I've since worked in kind of transformation, strategy, program management roles. And in 2021, I was lucky enough to relocate to the US with that job. So definitely, again, kind of that interest when it comes to the travel element, but also, you know, picking my companies in that regard to help support. Looking back, I didn't always know I wanted to be an accountant, but having kind of qualified as a chartered accountant, it's definitely given me that strong foundation, the global opportunities, and a career that's evolved way beyond what I had considered kind of traditional accounting. So very much kind of opened those doors for me.
Thank you. And I think what's really interesting about your journey is Ken talks about, you know, being very set on the career and being very almost linear, doing the accountancy and finance at university, then coming to it. So you had met with Deloitte when you were at school, been inspired, had something about professional services on your radar. You did a gap year and then you did a different discipline degree. Was that something you knew would still allow you into professional services if that's what you wanted, or was it just not in your mind at all at that point?
Yeah, I think the reason for picking my degree is very similar to Ken in the sense like I was good at the likes of business studies, maths, and geography. Couldn't decide, so ended up trying to combine all of them in that regard. But yeah, I think the school was very open to the fact that if you have a degree that has transferable skills, like you know, assuming it's not something like medicine, for example, I definitely wouldn't be able to go into, but they were, you know, keeping it more let's say generalist in that regard to enable choices to be kept open in that sense. So I knew that I needed to get a certain grade, as it were, for the degree, but not necessarily a certain functionality subject in that sense.
Great, and thank you for sharing that, because I think some of the people listening to this might not realise that you can come a little bit later to accountancy. You don't have to know when you're 12 and take your hires or your GCSEs and get to that point. You can absolutely do a first degree in a totally unrelated subject and transfer over. I know you mentioned medicine in the sense if you can't transfer into medicine, but we've had a number of students who have studied medicine at university and then taken the CA qualification. It's very transferable skills no matter what you study. Thank you. Lisa, could I ask you to tell us a little bit about your journey as well, please?
Hello, Bobby. Absolutely. So my route's a bit more like Ken's in that I was fortunate enough at secondary school to be offered the chance to do accountancy in third and fourth year, and it's that love of maths everybody's talking about. But you know, maths was much more my thing than languages were. So accountancy seemed like the natural route, and I genuinely remember the day that I was taught debits and credits for the first time, and it was like, this is me, this is it. It makes sense. There's no interpretation, which largely still holds true now. It's slightly more subjective the further you go, but they thought even like, this is what I want to do. So for me, it was natural to then to follow that through, and I went to RGU in Aberdeen. Pretty much because of the industrial placement year, which I know Jamie and your team still work with. So that's the opportunity. That third year was a year in industry, a paid year of work, which was such a natural choice for me that I had the opportunity to study and then see what the real world looked like. So that before I was a graduate, I had an idea that this really was what I wanted to do. So through RGU, I did my year's industrial placement at Deloitte. And absolutely loved it. So absolutely the option was to go back as a graduate and then do my traineeship there as well. And it's like Ken said, it's that breadth of knowledge that you gain really early on within the Big Four. For me, was the chance to see clients of all different sizes in all different locations and build like a really strong foundation of knowledge to then move forward. So I qualified at Deloitte, then chose to move to Johnston Carmichael, where I am now and have been for 10 years. But it was that breadth of knowledge that I gained at the Big Four that has really helped my career.
Great, thank you. And I think that breadth of knowledge, but also opportunity potentially. And I'm gonna come back to you after I speak to the other two about pursuing international opportunities, because I think you have a slightly different experience there. But Ken, can I ask you, so we said quite early on in your career, you had the opportunity for a secondment. I feel a bit foolish saying, what was it that attracted you to going to New York for a few months? But what was it that inspired you to go and work internationally?
So when I qualified, I joined PwC, or Coopers
Mhm.
and Lybrand as it was at the time, and I was in the Glasgow office, and people were just constantly going on secondment. Honestly, there was just like, it was like a revolving door, and I, you just, people were going all over the world, just coming back, going again, some 2, some 3, and I just thought, you know what, maybe I should be doing that. And honestly, at the time, it wasn't something, before I went to PwC, it wasn't something I'd ever really thought about. But when I saw everyone doing that, I thought, you know what, I'm just going to keep an eye out. And, fast forward a few years, I started increasingly doing insurance. I started specializing in the insurance industry, which I'm still doing now. And I used to work with the London office a lot, and I ended up in a due diligence in Poland for just a week, but that was my first global experience. Met someone there who ended up going to New York, kept in touch, and then the next year I was interviewing for the New York office in the insurance practice, and that's what I did. So I I think it's just seeing the opportunities that everyone else had, and thinking, you know what, I may hate it, but as someone who born and raised in Glasgow, although albeit I went to Dundee to university, I'm not going to get this chance again. And 28 years later this year, I'm still here, albeit with a different firm. So, and that was the kind of genesis of it.
And you, as you say, you've moved into another organization, another role. But to what extent do you credit the CA and that training route as being the lever that enabled you to do that?
Oh, definitely. It wouldn't have been an option without the CA. And in the US at PwC, even though I've since done the CPA, which is the American equivalent of the CA, but as a secondee, and honestly, only if you, apart from making partner, I could have operated with my CA for a long time. In industry, I wouldn't need to get a CPA. In public practice, it's just if you wanted to become a partner. So it allowed you to practice as though you were an American CPA, as long as you weren't at the partner level. It also gave me a great grounding in dealing with different types of people and clients. It was recognized in the US as well. There's a CA community in the US. I'm one of the local ambassadors in New York. It's when people are for resumes or whatever, it's probably it's a recognized quality. You have to explain it a little bit, because it's not everyone's not doing a chartered accounting exam, but when you kind of explain what it is, there's a definite understanding of it. And it's probably more like an MBA is here, frankly. So it's probably a little, hopefully my US CPA friends are not listening, but the the CA is definitely a tougher qualification, a more comprehensive qualification. There's a lot more of a managerial, MBA type aspect. MBAs are very big in the US, but there's more of that material in the CA than there would be in a CPA. CPA is pretty much strictly technical.
Thank you. Catherine, I think when I introduced you, I said that travel had always been a part of your career and your career plan. Could you talk to us a little bit about where the CA has taken you?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, definitely my desire to pursue international opportunities has helped kind of having that qualification, wanting to learn different cultures, kind of add in the additional variety to my day-to-day aspect of things. So whether that was at EY or with Novartis, I've always loved kind of the project-based roles, and working with those global companies has really been fulfilling and allowed me to do that. So with EY, having that financial rigor and holistic understanding has been invaluable for me, especially when kind of the rest of my team have been pulled in due to specific specialisms, so things like functional areas with supply chain, for example, or sector for the likes of retail, etc. Like the CA has really allowed me to take that step back, see the whole picture, and really kind of understand the levers, the risks, the interdependencies of a deal. So being able to go to the likes of Dubai, I would say that has been the added benefit that the qualification brings, because it does definitely give you that foundational understanding of how businesses work and really be able to apply even from quite a junior level that kind of rigor. From a Novartis standpoint, it came hand in hand with the fact that from a leadership team perspective, majority of our team sat in Europe. However, a lot of the growth was coming through the US route. So it kind of went hand in hand with a business need as well as a childhood dream to live in New York. And technically speaking, I would say at Novartis, I don't necessarily need a chartered accounting qualification to do my job, but it definitely helps massively. When I first joined, it was quite intimidating being in a leadership team where everyone had a series of letters after their names, typically linked, to pharmacist, scientist, engineer, etc. So it definitely gave me that badge of honor or credibility, I would say, at least from an introduction standpoint. And then having worked in kind of manufacturing and quality, it's definitely, a cost center from business perspective, but it's got a very clear purpose in terms of being able to deliver high quality products to your patients. So again, kind of that CA training gives me the balance of purpose, but balancing it with kind of that financial and risk discipline, as well as, what Ken mentioned, the ability to communicate with stakeholders across different functions and countries and kind of find that commonality so people have a genuine understanding in that regard. And then like Ken, and he's been great for me, moving to New York, the ICAS network definitely does help in that regard. So whether it's through networking events, the mentoring program as well, like it's definitely that genuine platform of everyone's gone through the same qualification, and they may have different careers in that regard, but the ICAS piece stays constant, whereas your employers, your roles are changing, and being able to kind of lean upon that network at different points in your career has definitely been a benefit for myself.
Thank you. And I think what's really nice about the panel we've got here, and Lisa, I said I'd come back to you last, and the reason I wanted to do that was I think it's really interesting to see we've got Ken, who moved abroad totally. That's where the international and the global reach of the CA has taken you. Catherine, you've spent time overseas. But Lisa, I believe that your career is really about how you manage globally and internationally facing clients, and be interested to hear a little bit more about that if we could.
Yeah, brilliant. So my story is different. I'm a home bird. And I think that in many ways, thinking about it in advance of today, is the CA, is that it is an individual route. The CA is what joins us all together and what gives that credibility and that quality. But it is your decision of then what you do with that CA, and that changes over time. So thinking about my role at the moment at Johnson Carmichael, for anybody who's not aware, Johnson Carmichael is an independent accountancy firm, largest accountancy firm, in Scotland, with reach into Northern England and into London as well. But while independent, as part of the Moore network, and the Moore network then allows us a global reach. So specifically in Aberdeen, thinking about my portfolio, it is very energy driven, and that energy drive is global. So my clients will have global reach, global different businesses throughout the world, global organizations. And what the Moore network allows us to do is provide our clients with an all-round service. So it's a global reach. It's working with contacts internationally to provide the tax advice in the country that my clients are in. It's to provide audits globally using component auditors. And it's the CA that allows us to do that, because it's a CA that's recognized through that network, that allows us to be part of that network, and is then recognized with the partner firms that we're working with to provide that service as a joined up service to our clients.
Great. And I think it really does touch on that there isn't a right or wrong path either into the profession or once you're qualified. So you work, I believe, in audit, so your CA is how you've got your role, whereas the other two have said it's not necessary for the role, but is helpful in everything you do in getting to the role. And there is no all or nothing approach either, which is you can move internationally if you want to, and Ken's a great example of that, but you can also then sit in an office and look globally and have that real global outlook. And I think it would be interesting to hear just a little bit more about from all of you about how you develop that global outlook as part of your CA training, as part of the networks. And potentially, you know, how is that qualification perceived after you've explained it a little bit, Ken, as you said you had to. So I don't know if anyone wants to jump in on that.
Yeah, I can. I would say for me, the qualification definitely supports all of kind of that strong professional framework it provides you. So effectively the financial rigor, the ethical judgment, risk management, governance. And like I said, it kind of does give you that confidence to operate in different spaces and across borders, sectors, because it is definitely something you understand how business works in quite a rigorous way in that regard. So I would say that's probably the main thing that sticks out for me from a perception standpoint. Definitely well recognized. I mean, again, kind of coming from that pharma space, it's probably less recognized. You have to explain a bit, like Ken said, you have to explain kind of what it stands for. But as soon as people can resonate what the equivalent is for their country, there's kind of that nod of, okay, yeah, you know, you're not stupid. You are here for good reason in that regard. And I do genuinely think that diversity is also quite interesting. So like I said, for me, coming onto a leadership team where it was full of kind of scientists, engineers, pharmacists, etc. I was youngest by far. I was the only female. Like, it was quite an interesting one because I really did actually have that confidence with my qualification, which I maybe hadn't appreciated before because I was more in a Big Four environment where more and more people had that qualification. That it definitely gave me that kind of mark of professional rigor. Again, kind of the strong ethics side of things, but also people knew and respected the fact that you go through high quality training and you continue that professional development throughout your career.
Yeah,
and that's
I think
a
it's
really interesting. Oh, sorry, Ken. I
no,
was just
sorry,
going
no,
to say it's a really interesting point about being in an environment where everybody has a particular industry specific qualification and then being in a separate environment where you bring that knowledge and that reputation with you. Apologies, Ken, please
no,
go
no,
ahead.
not at all. Just echoing what Catherine said. I think it's that, you know, I mean, what do we say? We call it the badge, right? Like the CA badge, and in Scotland and in the UK, like, you don't have to explain it. Everyone knows what that means. It's just that little bit of explanation. But people generally in the world recognize chartered accountancy as a qualification. The US is a little different because it has its own thing, which isn't called chartered accountants, chartered accountancy. But there is a general awareness of it. It's a little bit different, but with a little bit of explanation, you know, and people can see how you operate as well. And, you know, and that business understanding and kind of level you get from the CA really, I think, you know, comes through in everything you do.
Great, thank you. Lisa, anything you would like to?
Yeah, I suppose I'll quite contrast to Catherine in that where I work, everybody is either a CA, you know, in practice or is training to be a CA. But I think it's the recognition of the quality of teaching that ICAS gives, where the CA is the foundation that then supports the real life experience. So our students are being taught the technical basis that when they then come back into audit, the real life world comes together. But I think it's that recognition that the ICAS qualification isn't given. You have to work hard for it, but that benchmark is there intentionally because that is the quality that you want the CAs to be coming through as. And it means that when we're then working either with our clients or through the network globally, there's a recognition of the technical quality of training that you have been through with ICAS.
Brilliant, thank you. And you've all touched a little bit on the network and the membership aspect of the CA and ICAS. I'm going to ask you what advice you would give to people looking to pursue an international career, whether they're already qualified or they're thinking about, actually what I want is to work in this region. What kind of career could get me there? Ken, could I come to you on that one?
Yeah, and I think probably the easiest path is if you're in audit or tax. You know, like it's probably a little. Catherine, I think, has probably a different perspective, but I think audit and tax are more likely to be opportunities. And what I would say is, if you're at a Big Four firm, you know, I'm sure they still do this, but you know, there used to be a database. You know, it was obvious. It's online now. I'm sure it's just on the web, but you know, basically where there were opportunities where you could kind of keep an eye a few years in advance. So not necessarily immediately before you want to go. I think you want to kind of think about where you might want to go. You know, if you have the same experience I had when I was in Glasgow, are there other people going? Talk to them. You know, find out how they did that, or what their approach was. You know, if you have a mentor at the firm, you know, start just raising it there, and just, you know, sometimes opportunities just come up when, you know, you're actually not expecting them. So if an international opportunity comes up, at least they know that you're interested. If you're in a smaller firm, national firm, you know, even like a non-national firm, there's often a short-term secondments. You know, as Lisa was saying about with Moore or with the affiliate organizations, the umbrella organizations, there's often like an opportunity to go for maybe 6 weeks, a couple of months during busy season. Sometimes, like in Australia, for example, their busy season is the opposite of ours in the US and UK. So, you know, maybe 2 busy seasons in 1 year is you know, it's a little bit too much. However, it gives you a nice chance to see another country and get a taster, you know, whether you may want to try and do that later on. So I think it's kind of keeping your eyes and ears open, you know, being vocal. You know, actually, people don't know if you don't say to them. So there's nothing worse than, you know, you just sit there thinking, I'd really like to do this, and then you never say anything. And I used to be, when I was in Scotland, some of this is US, it's almost cultural, right? But I'm much more, I used to be very introverted in the UK. I'm very extroverted. Maybe I'm not extroverted, but I'm much less introverted than I used to be. And I'm much more, I'm fine about, you know, like talking in a group, talking in a webinar, you know, whatever. And I think that's a bit of cultural difference, but even if Quiet Ken from Glasgow can do this, then anyone out there can do this. You just need to be vocal, basically.
Thank you. And I think that's a really great piece of career advice, not just when it comes to international opportunities, but if there's something you're interested in, let people know, because nobody knows what's in your head. If you're not actively saying, I'd love the opportunity to, no one's going to know at all. So thank you. Catherine, Lisa, is there anything you'd like to add on how to think about building that career?
But yeah, I guess from my side, just factor in, be patient. There will be setbacks. You know, when I was applying for internships, the US was very much on my horizon, but I didn't have a visa and it was nigh on impossible. But at the time, I really wanted it, so I was doing it. And similarly, when I had my secondment opportunity at EY, Dubai wasn't necessarily my first choice. But in hindsight, I think actually going to EY for my internship and going to Dubai, they have really helped define who I am in my career to date. So, you know, take those pivots, changes in the path of what you think as a positive. So don't, you know, be open, let's say, and be curious. As Ken said, definitely proactivity and kind of voicing what you want, and don't be afraid to do that. I think sometimes we can be a bit more reserved and shy in doing that because we're scared that it might not happen, for example. But in that regard, definitely voice it and leverage networks, right? Again, from a Dubai standpoint, I didn't have any contacts there. It was very much my people manager who introduced me to a couple of people. I got talking, and then I could, put them with confidence on my application and kind of give some nuances to that market to kind of try and help my application stand out in that regard. And that definitely helped by speaking to people, whether it's friends, whether it's colleagues that have worked there, and bear in mind your network from even a younger age. You never know how they will come back. And we were always taught at first days of EY, I always remember being taught, your peers that are sat with you are going to go through the ranks with you. They're going to kind of grow up in that sense with you, and they can be really helpful, useful contacts. And again, I think it's sometimes generalizing massively, but sometimes it is a cultural thing of not wanting to ask for help in that regard. But I think the more you can speak up and say what you want, the bigger you can leverage that community.
Thank you. I think there's some phenomenal advice in there. One of the really big things is the ICAS international communities. We have a thriving community in America, Canada, but also in UAE. And I know from experience that our members are incredibly generous. Apart from the three of you on the call today, giving up your time to hopefully inspire the next generation of CAs coming through. But also, if you're moving or relocating to a global territory, there's usually somebody who will say, oh yes, I know this, I will help you with X. And I think that's one of the real benefits of being part of a membership organisation. But the other piece of advice you gave, which I think is spot on, is you might not always get the thing that you think is your first choice, but it might turn out that the thing that you think was your second choice is actually the right choice for you. And it's about how you make the most of those opportunities, even if they're not quite the picture in your head at the time. Brilliant, thank you. Lisa, I'm going to ask you for what would your advice be if somebody wants to have that global exposure and to be working internationally without leaving the UK or without leaving the city that they need to be in for whatever reason? Do you have any tips for them?
Yeah, I think it extends from what everybody said. I think it's just put your hand up and say yes. It's take the opportunity, and it might not be the opportunity that you think it is, but you never know where these things will reach. And like Ken said, the more connection gives us the opportunities for secondments. And Australia, as you say, matches perfectly with the UK for that double busy season if you're keen. But even smaller than that, it's not even that. It's the opportunity to work in a different business line or work in a different team, and you just never know where these things will lead. And I don't know that many people who have a big grand plan. I don't think you need to know necessarily where your end goal is, because that changes on the way, and that's okay too. But I think you don't know what you don't know, and you haven't experienced everything until you have. So I think put your hands up, take every opportunity. And as Ken says, let people know what it is you think you'd like to try, because the opportunities are there. We just got to match the right people up with the right opportunities. And it's much easier if you know where the natural interest lies.
I think that's an absolutely perfect point to pause on and to say thank you. And what I'm going to do is now throw over to some of the questions that have come in from the audience, because they're covering some of the questions I would have asked, but there's also a couple of really interesting questions in there. So I'm going to start us gently with, what part of your CA training do you find is the most directly relevant when you're thinking globally or working internationally? And I'm going to say fastest fingers on buzzers. If you've got something you want to contribute, please do.
I think for me, I would say the education, right? You go through the likes of business management, business law, audit, tax, genuinely how your financials are working. So it kind of gives you that, let's say, common language of business. So whether you're working in finance directly or more in strategy operations types roles that I have, or other non-financial roles, I think you have the ability to be able to speak around financial performance, risk, governance, decision making, because you genuinely understand how a business operates in that aspect. So I would say they're probably tying it all together, and that final exam, as hard as it is, like, it does really nicely bring all of the themes together to be able to kind of overlay for a particular case study how that business is operating and what the levers are in that regard and the interdependencies.
And I was, just to feed off Catherine, I completely agree with Catherine, those aspects of it. And although I was still in accounting, I was in a different gap. So I was in like US GAAP, and then I do insurance. So we have this regulatory thing called statutory, which is not like statutory you'd know in the UK. It's like a separate basis of accounting. So even though I was changing the accounting basis and I had to relearn that when I came on secondment, the fundamentals of just understanding the financial statements, just businesses generally that Catherine was talking about, that's the real basis. I'm not saying the UK GAAP was irrelevant, but it wasn't as meaningful to me as I kind of moved on to my next kind of path, if you like. But the fundamentals of the qualification, the non-strictly technical parts were extremely beneficial.
I think if you apply that back into practice in the UK, I think as well that integration exam was TPE and Maddie, but integration now is taking the technical and making it relevant to the audience you're speaking to. And I think that's really relevant when you're working internationally as well, because it's a recognition that cultures are different, working hours are different, weekends fall on different days, and you have to be able to adapt your style to respect different cultures and different working practices. And I think that holistic view at the end really helps with that.
Thank you. And I think that holistic view and that ethical leadership, that kind of some of the different kind of skills you get from the CA around professional judgment, professional skepticism, they're clearly not jurisdiction based. They are applicable to any career in any organization. And I think that's a real kind of leg up in terms of trying to work wherever you are, just bringing those higher level thinking skills that you get as part of the training as well. Thank you.
It reminds me of my business management teacher always saying, expect the unexpected.
I mean, I like that very much the point Lisa made about just understanding other cultures and kind of just accepting that things are done a little bit differently, but within the boundaries of what you know is an ethical and professional framework. I think that's probably the best of all of it, right? We've had a really interesting question, which I'd love to hear your views on, which is how do you see AI and technology changing cross-border accounting over the next decade? I love that it's limited to the next decade, but also we're obviously all on a Teams call. We're not in the same city or even in the same country, all of us. So we know that technology has changed everything beyond recognition, particularly if, like me and Ken, you maybe started your career back in the 90s, unrecognizable today, right? But
Totally.
what do you think what will be the next big changes, do you think, coming down the line?
I mean, I'm the older guy here, right? So it's kind of I'm adapting to it. We've been using it increasingly. This year in particular, there's been a big push, and I think I've used it myself in some situations recently, actually, where we were looking. It wasn't an audit, but it was assisting a company that was thinking of purchasing a company in a different geography, and actually using it to determine the particular regulatory changes or framework around what the products they were selling was really helpful, because basically that would have, before I had the capability to open Copilot 365, that would have probably been a day, someone, looking at that, me then looking at what they put together, and then kind of, going through determining what was important, what wasn't important. And I was able within an hour, maybe an hour and a half, going back and forth, and I had a pretty decent understanding of, where the issue was, and we ended up not running with it. But at the same time, it allowed me to make that determination pretty quickly, as opposed to, as I say, it could be like a couple of days, by the time you kind of get through everything. So I think that's the benefit of it, and I see that's just going to really grow. I will say we had our our national audit training just a few weeks ago, our kind of semi-annual thing, and there was much more technology in it. And I found it, as one of the older people in the room, a little overwhelming. However, even already as I've been getting into it, I feel like, this is something I can adapt to. It's not as it is going to have a major impact, but I think going back to the fundamentals of the CA and how you learn, how you end up getting through the exams, I think you can't rubbish in, rubbish out, right? You can't just take what it gives you and assume that's correct. You still have to challenge it and kind of understand where the holes in it are. So anyway, that's my thought.
Great, and that kind of adaptability and resilience while having that underlying skill basis is such a great way to look at it, that things will change, but things will also stay the same, I guess.
Right, exactly.
You mentioned audit, so I'm going to come to Lisa, who is working in audit. How do you see, specifically for audit, I guess, how do you see the changes coming down the line? What's on your radar for the next decade?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating how AI is going to change audit. It's going to completely change the traditional ticking and bashing that we trained under, right? And I think where training will move to, and I think where ICAS CA will move to, is this isn't going to replace roles, but AI can do that repetitive piece for us. So what's critical is that we adapt those skills to become analysts. And like you say, it's rubbish in, rubbish out. It's how do we check the quality, and how we don't have to tick it and bash it the same, but you need to be able to interpret that. And we've all seen AI work, we've all seen AI not work, and it's having those skills to analyze and to interpret that data is, I think, where it's going to change. But I think it's a fascinating time to be involved in the industry, because I think it really is going to change quite quickly.
And it's great to hear that positivity. And as an institute, we agree with you, that I think it's an exciting time, but there will be more of a demand than ever for skilled, trained people who know whether it's rubbish out or whether it's perfect, what's coming out. And that professional critical judgment is more necessary than ever. When you read something that says, I read something recently that I'm a qualified doctor through AI, and I'm like, I'm very much not. So we need people to be challenging what AI is coming out with. Catherine, any other thoughts from you in that space? Because I know you're working in a slightly different industry.
I would just add on the element of kind of that professional skepticism. I think it's also quite interesting from a risk standpoint, and thinking, especially cyber aspects of things, like how companies get themselves set up for success to be potentially more operating in a more complex space, and open, maybe more susceptible to certain risks in that regard that AI naturally comes with. And I think, like Lisa said, it is a fascinating, interesting time to be a part of that and to build up the skill sets, because you still need that foundational understanding, the financial rigor, etc., to be able to understand what is actually going on, and to be able to challenge what's been put in is garbage, or if it is accurate in that regard.
Thank you. And are you seeing specific, I guess, cross-border challenges? Because I know that in some territories they're really far advanced on their AI journey, others less so. Some regulatory systems are more conservative than others. So have there been mismatches that you've been seeing coming down the line, or so far do you think it's all much for muchness?
For me personally, I've seen it kind of similar. I guess the added challenge complexity, right, as we're teaching these tools, is being taught by specific people, and so maybe there isn't that consideration for differences in cultures, etc. So I think we still need to have that human touch, that human lens, and be adaptable in that regard. But yeah, I haven't necessarily seen it being as a challenge from a cross border perspective. It is, if anything, it's probably opened up more opportunities in that regard. But I think it is, understanding that kind of cultural differences, the business practice differences that come into play with that aspect, that we need to make sure that people are considering.
Thank you. Ken, you look like you might have something to say there.
No, I think I've seen it basically and most of my work is US based, so I'm
Mhm.
I'm doing a little bit of international as I'm international, but most of it's US based, and I haven't
Mhm.
seen a lot of variation in so far anyway. Though that, as these tools develop, that may well change. But
Thank you. Then I'm going to pick up on what Catherine just said about cross-cultural challenges and getting used to different cultures' ways of working. Have any of you any experiences of those kind of cross-cultural ways of working that have surprised you?
I I have a kind of funny story from my first year, but maybe you have to be from Scotland to appreciate it. I don't know, but so I did my first busy season here. I thought I was doing a great job, and then I get my review from the partner, and Poppy, you would get this, but it was actually on paper. It was like a piece of paper in my mailbox, my draft review, and it said, Ken has a thick Scottish brogue, and both myself and the client tried very hard to understand him. So I immediately, and that's why I have the kind of odd accent I have now, but basically I slowed down massively because a Glaswegian accent was not cutting it in in New York, and they were finding it very hard to attune themselves. So, that that's that seems like it's funny in retrospect, but that night when I got that, I felt like just booking a ticket and coming home, honestly. But that was the first year, and you kind of learn from this stuff. But overall, people here in the US work extremely hard. They do very long hours. It's a much more direct kind of business environment. There's no, like, people don't spare your feelings really to some extent. It's much less consensual, or I don't know what the word is, but in the UK, where maybe a little bit of, like, no one's going to directly call you out in something necessarily, maybe in a roundabout way, but here it's much more hits you right between the eyes, and I think that's made me. I was talking earlier about being much more, less of an introvert than I used to be, and I think that's the culture has shaped me over those years. And when I go back to Scotland now, I had a university reunion 3 years ago, and everyone thought I was the most changed person because it used to be so quiet. So it's for good or ill, your environment that you're working in or operating in really can change you. And but you adapt. I think that going back to the CA, it makes you adaptable, right? So you yes, you learn all this technical stuff, but you also just learn how, like, overall business environment, and then you just tweak it as you go along, even to changing your accent or slowing how fast you talk.
The speed of talking is something, when I've dealt with international markets, is something I've been very aware of, because I tend to talk super fast and with my hands in all directions, which isn't always appropriate. Catherine, anything you'd like to mention here?
I guess with the differences in cultures, I've probably seen it typically when there are tensions linked to things that come into play. So when we've seen like a need for urgency, high pressure, kind of stakes are high, typically people don't consider those differences. So as Ken says, there's kind of the directness in certain regions. We've got more relationship driven, emotive aspects. So you can really see, if you take that step back, you can really see why there maybe are some misunderstandings or incorrect assumptions, really coming from that cultural aspect. I mean, for me, on a more positive note, I would say what really helped me and felt was a very defining experience was actually a miscomment to Dubai. One of the partners offered to pick me up from my hotel and take me to my first client meeting and really kind of walk through what the cultural norms are on the way to the client meeting. You know, things like waiting for the client to shake my hand or not being offended if they don't want to shake my hand, things like being quiet in meetings, even though I'd done the preparation and I might own that part of the project, very much waiting to be requested to speak. You know, there's a very big appreciation from a hierarchy standpoint, as well as, you know, gender, etc., which was quite different for me, because in the UK you're kind of fighting for your seat at the table. You really want to show what you've done, prove your worth, etc. So it was really eye-opening in that regard, and something I was able to relay back as well to the team based in the UK to kind of have that better kind of understanding, appreciation of differences in culture, and be able to adapt in our approaches there. So kind of having that increased global collaboration, let's say, across the borders, which you don't necessarily pick up on if you're on a phone call, but when you're there in person, you very much do pick up on those things.
Absolutely. Lisa, anything that's come across your radar?
And you've got ethical leadership on your shoulder from where I sit, and I think that's it. It's just that respect, isn't it? It's respect for other people, other people's situations, and do you know, I think nothing beats speaking to people. So emails are great. Emails mean that I can do them in my time and you can do them in your time, and reply and cross border, that works. But things get misconstrued by email. Things can be misinterpreted, and I think nothing replaces that genuine conversation that takes place. And I think it probably resolves things faster, and you both understand each other. And I think that might mean, you know, call at the start of my day is the call at the end of your day, and you work around those kind of cultural differences. But I think nothing can replace genuinely speaking to people.
And that brings us back to the human element, which is, you know, the professional human element, which no matter what happens with technology is always going to be relevant, I think. We're almost out of time. I'm just going to ask you one very quick fire question, because I think it's a nice question. If at this point in your career you could take a 6-month secondment anywhere in the world, where would you go?
Canada.
Nice. That was almost without thinking. Canada. Okay.
But today, anywhere warm, it's snowing outside, I would take anywhere that was warm.
That's almost everywhere except Aberdeen or New York, right?
I'm going to go with Lisa's response too, based on my icebox snow at the moment. So.
The Caribbean islands, guys.
Thank you all so much. I really thank you for joining us and sharing your experiences. I'd like to thank everyone who's joined up to hear from you as well. For our audience, it would be really great if you could leave us a rating for today's webinar. There's going to be a short question poll appearing on your screens now. Yeah, Tasha's perfect on this. Do hope it's been helpful for you, and until the next time, goodbye, and thank you again to the panelists.
Thank you.